Today is the 10th of November, the day before Remembrance Day in Canada and Veterans Day in the United States. It's important to reflect on the sacrifices that were made by the young men and women who put themselves in harm's way so we could live in peace. I hope you take some time on the 11th to enjoy that freedom by participating in a local parade. Hello YouTubers, this is the Noobifier and welcome to a discussion about the atmospheric flight mechanics of spaceships in Star Citizen. I'd like to thank John Pritchett, who's the senior physics programmer at Star Citizen. He took some time out of his day today to look over my notes and answer some questions for us. His input ensured that today's subject is well planted in fact, directly from the source. The topic of atmospheric flight versus atmospheric effect has been very interesting to research because there's two opposing schools of thought. It's always been my goal to steer clear of theorycraft, and thank you very much, John, for your help. Let's begin. There are some citizens that insist that ships should fly in atmosphere like an airplane. And there's some citizens that expect a flight model similar to spaceflight, but with some of the effects of gravity and atmosphere. It would probably be pretty easy to just copy-paste a flight sim code into the procedural planet tech. Just making everything fly may sound intuitive at first until you actually break down the forces at work, which is exactly what I did today. It's not that hard to find a post suggesting that ships in Star Citizen must fly and not be allowed to just hover. Some also suggest that we should add a hover limiting mechanic, in essence forcing you to either land or fly. Our first peek into atmospheric flight came from the racing module in 2014. Being a very early alpha, the racing flight model was a direct copy-paste placeholder from the regular flight model, but with a planet surface. We have and still enjoy the look and feel of racing above a planet, but the simulation model lacks a big chunk of realism because it doesn't include gravity. Some assume that this is also the case when watching ships hover on the 3.0 planetary tech demos. They probably think the entire flight model is just temporary, but it's a lot closer to complete than a placeholder. We watched the ship stop and hover without pilot intervention, and this is where most of the criticism comes from. The thing we need to remember is that this isn't a flight simulator with planes. It's a space simulator with spaceships. Some more citizen feedback suggested a more skill-based hovering mechanic be implemented, forcing a pilot to make constant corrections like a helicopter. Their argument is that the game should require more skill, but this suggestion is also very easy to explain away. Currently in Q3 of 2017, we have self-driving cars and inexpensive drones that can hover automatically. I feel it's unrealistic and possibly even ludicrous to believe that so many years in the future, something as complex as a spaceship would lack the basic automation that's becoming commonplace today. It's important to look beyond the idea that atmosphere automatically means flight. Airplanes rely on lifting bodies because that offers the most efficient way to fly. IFCS in Star Citizen is modeled to translate the pilot's input into an expected motion. In the absence of input, the ship would make efforts to remain stationary. So that also means that IFCS would also apply whatever forces would be needed to keep that craft fixed if that was the pilot's intent. It would be very easy for IFCS to offset the effect of gravity and crosswind. Our fleet of spaceships have thrust in any direction at a rate much higher than the force of gravity. Some ships even possess sufficient force to cause a pilot to black out. With that, in most cases, it makes physical sense that whichever direction the pilot chooses to park, providing the thruster output is greater than the force required to remain stationary, it should. This in essence is auto-hover. Another common thread talks about adding limitations which would prevent an extended hover. Making the thrusters overheat over time is one suggestion, and another was adding a fuel limit. Neither of those scenarios make any sense either. Overheating is actually more likely in the vacuum of space. The lack of an atmosphere will allow heat soaking to occur quickly as the energy has practically nowhere to radiate to. Technically and based on physics, a thruster would have better cooling within an atmosphere. Adding a fuel limit also makes very little sense because our ships regenerate SCM fuel, resulting in perpetual thrust. So far, John confirmed some very big questions, and the answers made me happy because they actually make sense. Here's some other ideas which are being toyed with, which could make it into the game. We might expect limits within the simulated physics, and by that I mean, not all ships may possess the required sustained thrust to perform maneuvers required to hover against gravity. We can all agree that an Icarus isn't as agile as an M50, and that it has a very different thrust-to-mass ratio. A well-maintained Icarus may have the sufficient sustained thrust to take off and hover in a positive z-axis. Rolling the Icarus a couple degrees may overwhelm the vectored thrust, causing a situation where the ship would lose altitude. Ships' flight characteristics may be altered by planets with higher than average gravity, or atmospheric conditions that will reduce thruster capability. Your flight will also reflect cargo mass and thruster damage automatically. In the case of an M50, unless one of the systems are damaged, we could expect its very high thrust-to-mass ratio to enable it to hover in any orientation the pilot sees fit. Fighting gravity will be a case-by-case scenario, which is calculated and simulated in real time. I will close out the video with an exciting mechanic that John mentioned. Currently, this is just an idea, but it combines some of the requests that the community had. The original Gladius model had articulating control surfaces like a plane, plus its design incorporates lifting bodies that may be more than just looks. John mentioned that case by case, and given the correct situation, a ship like the Gladius could be modeled to fly like a spaceship, but could include some flight physics. He explained that it might be a fairly seamless transition as IFCS would still function as expected, but wouldn't need to rely so much on the thrusters to keep the ship airborne. As the ship moved quicker, more lift would automatically be generated and less duty would be required from the thrusters. The pilot would also easily transition back to hover simply by reducing velocity. It's therefore not a case of flight being added to the game as much as a perfectionist's quest to achieve the best simulation in the best damn space sim in the universe. Here are two fun situations I'd like you to consider. Imagine needing to fly inverted due to damage on your lower thrusters. And imagine having to manually counter gravity with your thrusters when flying decoupled due to damage to your IFCS. Thanks very much for spending your time with me. If you got something out of this video and you like the channel's no bullshit approach, please consider telling a friend or org mate. Fly safe, and I'll see you in the verse.